Hey, it's Ron again. I hope that you're having a great day. At the end of chapter 19, we saw that the Antichrist and the false prophet were going to be captured and thrown into the lake of fire, which most people call hell. And then that big army, this huge army that they gathered together, will be destroyed by Jesus just speaking. And then that brings us to chapter 20. It says this in chapter 20, verse 1. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it, and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer, until the 1,000 years were ended. After that he must be released for a little while. So what will happen then is Satan will be captured. He'll be thrown into a prison where he won't be able to influence the earth in a bad way anymore. And for 1,000 years he'll be there. And during that time, Jesus will rule on earth as king of the earth. And it also says here that Satan will be released at the end of those 1,000 years. And we'll see more about that a little bit later. Then he says in verse 4, Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. Also I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So when he talks here about these people sitting on thrones and judging, nobody has a good explanation for what that means. It's just not elaborated on. It's not clear. But then he talks here about the Christians who die during the tribulation. He says that they will be resurrected and they will rule with Christ, with Jesus, for that 1,000-year millennium. And this verse supports the pre-tribulation rapture view. And the reason is because in 1 Thessalonians 4, Paul says that when the rapture happens, the dead Christians will be raised first. They'll join the live Christians, and then they'll all be caught up to be with Jesus forever. So this would make perfect sense that the people who become Christians after the rapture during the tribulation would need to be resurrected in order to enter the millennium. But for the people who believe the rapture happens at the end of the tribulation, this would have to be explained, because they would have to explain why the people who died during the tribulation were not raptured then. But it's not settled. It's still, there are good arguments for both sides, so it's just not settled. So the people who are raptured, all the Christians, will come back with Jesus, and it says they'll reign with Jesus during the millennium for 1,000 years. And then the people who become Christians during the tribulation and are killed, they'll be resurrected and will rule with Jesus for that 1,000-year millennium. So the question is, who will they rule over? And if we look at Matthew chapter 25, it says when Jesus returns, he will separate at that time the Christians from the non-Christians. And the non-Christians he'll send into judgment, and the Christians he'll say, "Come, enter my kingdom." So it'll be the people, the Christians who survive the tribulation and are still alive, they will go into the millennium. And during the millennium, they'll repopulate the earth. Then it says in verse 5, The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. So there are two parts to the first resurrection. One is at the rapture when those Christians are resurrected, and then the other part is what we see here when the people who died during the tribulation are resurrected. And then it says everyone else will not be resurrected, all the non-Christians, until the end of the millennium. And that's when the final judgment will happen. And John also says that the second death has no power over the Christians. And we'll see later on in Revelation, it defines what the second death is. And the second death is another name for the lake of fire or hell. So during the millennium, Jesus will be king of the earth. It'll start out with all Christians, and the people who are Christians before the millennium will be ruling with Jesus. And so this is going to be an incredible time on earth. It's going to be a time of world peace. And if we look at Isaiah chapter 65, it says there that during this millennium, when somebody dies at the age of 100, they'll be considered dying young. So it's going to be a time also of long life. And so during this time, the world is going to be repopulated, and it's just going to be an incredible time on earth. But it says in verse 7, "And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea." So at the end of the millennium, Satan will be released from his prison, and it says he will go out and gather the nations from the four corners of the earth. Now, the four corners of the earth just meant from every direction. So even though the millennium will start with Jesus as king of the earth, and everyone on earth will be Christians, by the end of the millennium, Satan will be able to gather this huge army to fight against Jesus. And this just shows that it's not our environment that makes us do evil. They'll have a great environment, but they'll still rebel against God. And this shows us it's just the sinfulness of the human heart that makes us do bad things. And then it says in verse 9, "And they marched up over the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city, but fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever." So Satan will lead this huge army that he gathers, and they'll surround the beloved city. Now the beloved city is referring to Jerusalem, and that's where Jesus will reign for the millennium. So they'll come up, they'll surround Jesus and the Christians. But there won't be a fight, because fire will come down from heaven, it'll consume this army, and then Satan will be cast into the lake of fire, or what we call hell. So he'll be cast there, and it says he'll be put there forever. And so he'll never come out, he'll never be able to cause problems again. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.